My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Thank you for joining me for this IPA talk, and I'm pleased to have with me Casey McCarty, who is the principal of Indian Creek High School in Shabona. Did I get that right, Casey?
Shabona, yep.
Shabona. Sorry, gosh. Yes, doggone it.
That's all right.
I always know when telemarketers call my house because they can never pronounce Leahy correctly. So shame on me for not having that correct, but thank you for correcting me. So Casey, tell us a little bit about yourself, your journey there, because I know you explained to me that you're now in year 2, and I'd like to know a little bit about you and what brought you to where you are now.
Sure. So I am in my second year as principal here at Indian Creek High School. Obviously, it's been all COVID, so I keep waiting for that break to be like, all right, is this normal yet? Is this normal yet? I'm trying to figure things out, but I think that's also given me some leeway to learn along the way. Our community and students and staff out here have been wonderful through the whole thing. They've really supported what the school district's done, which has made my job much easier. So before here, I was a dean of students at Oswego East High School for 3 years, and then I had taught science for 4 years before that at Marengo High School. So it's all in Northern Illinois. I live here in DeKalb, so I'm about 20 minutes away from where I work, and I got into administration because teaching's hard and I wanted to make the teachers' lives easier. I wanted to do what I could to make the teachers' lives easier.
Starting in a pandemic, which is not an easy task at all, and kudos to you for being willing to take on that challenge. What did you find for yourself working to build relationships and get to know people and dealing with that in these extreme circumstances?
Yeah, I think, building relationships is kind of the core tenet for me in education in general. To me, education is a people business. It's all about the relationship. So coming in, pandemic or not, that was my number one focus. So I kind of laid out a plan for the board coming in of these were the things I was going to accomplish in that first year. Even with masks on, knowing every single student in the building, knowing all of their names, really making it a point to get in and out of classrooms, talking to teachers, getting their input. Not really, last year was, a year to be adaptable and flexible, but it wasn't a year necessarily to go and just change everything to change things, trying to, get people through and make it easier than they thought it could be. So it just started with a ton of conversations and being there before school, after school, talking to the teachers and really getting their feedback on a lot of what we were doing to try to be successful last year.
Yeah. Well, so let me ask you, so the date of this recording, just for people's reference, is March 15th. So we've been a couple of weeks past, the drop of the mask mandates. How's that been for you now over the last few weeks?
So it's been really nice. We decided to go optional right after the court decision. Mm-hmm. Our community and board has wanted that local control for a long time. We are a small rural district. So that, even though people have been supportive, it's been a stress on us. So we've really seen, no major discipline issues when that's come. Our parents, our community has been much happier. It is something that we're working with, though, just to make sure that, we talk about those layered mitigation strategies. So masking is just one layer of that mitigation strategy. So still explaining to some of our community and parents that, we have multiple layers in place, and, it's nice right now. Our COVID numbers are really low, kids, and everyone's feeling good about that. But that could change real quick. So knowing as a school district that, we still want to keep those layers in place going forward. But overall, it's certainly nice to see everyone's smiling faces again.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, I can tell you from here, as we've monitored things across the state, it feels like things are just a little more at peace. Everybody's been able to take a breath, and all of that has been helpful. Well, Casey, this wasn't just the only reason I wanted to talk, but as I've got school leaders with me and we're having these conversations, I'm always remiss if I don't at least ask how it's going and what it's been like for you leading during this time. But you now have done an extraordinary thing yourself, and really, really extraordinary when you look at the time and effort, the time that you did it. I mean, not only have you been doing this during a pandemic, I didn't know at the time that it was also you basically starting a new job as you finished up your doctoral degree. So congratulations with that. And one of the reasons I wanted to make sure that we had this IPA talk was to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your research and your dissertation, and the work that you did with that, because I think it's particularly applicable right now, as we talk about just making sure that we're taking care of ourselves during this time. And and you've done some research related to that. And so if you wouldn't mind, I for those that are watching this and those that are just listening, you'll be able to follow along, not a problem. For those that are watching, I want to give you an opportunity to share your screen to share some information about the work that you've done, because I think it's extremely interesting. I think it's extremely important for us at this point in time, and that you've got some real data that explains kind of what's going on and why we need to be paying attention to taking care of ourselves as school leaders here, at all times, but particularly right now. So talk to me about your dissertation and the research that you did.
Sure. So I just defended my dissertation here in February through Aurora University. Really enjoyed the program and the faculty that I got to work with through my entire superintendent endorsement, as well as the doctoral program and writing the dissertation. So what I was looking at was administrator burnout and self-care, and how does administrators practicing self-care affect their feeling of burnout? This started as a passion of mine. I enjoy working out. I enjoy playing sports. Like, that's a release for me that I enjoy. And I was starting to feel burnt out in that just straight discipline role. And when I was dean of students, and it's negative, it's a tough job being a dean of students. So that's where I started kind of getting the idea for this dissertation and looking at how can I better help myself with those feelings that I was having, and how could administrators better help themselves. So I was able to send a survey out to Illinois Principal Association members that were public school administrators only, and through all levels. So we were looking at K through 12 public school administrators. You could have been a principal, an assistant principal, associate principal, or a dean of student were the ones I was looking at. The data you're going to look at is really focused more on that AP principal role. We only had about 17, or I only had, about 17 dean of students fill out the survey completely. So that wasn't enough to really get data on. But I ended up with 497 total participants in the survey. So I think that gives us a pretty good base to look at some of this data. So you see my screen all right there, Jason?
And we sure can. You bet. Let's get into it.
Perfect. So we'll pop into it. So what I titled my paper was the burnout dilemma. And we'll just kind of get into it here and talk about it. So the question we were looking at is, does practicing self-care reduce the feeling of burnout? That's what we were really looking at in this case. So there's a few things that I think are important to this study that administrators need to know, and there's some definitions going into it about how burnout's defined, how self-care is defined, how we actually looked at those things. And that helps us make sense of some of the data later. So for burnout, I used the Maslach Burnout Inventory Educator Survey. This is like basically anyone researching burnout is using Maslach's Burnout Inventory. It's used all over the place in research, but it breaks burnout down into 3 domains. So you have emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. And we have a little asterisk there by emotional exhaustion, because emotional exhaustion really is the thing that starts burnout. That's where people really start feeling burnt out. They start feeling exhausted from that. And that's the largest contributor to the feeling of burnout. So for emotional exhaustion, just some definitions real quick. That's that tired, fatigued feeling that develops as your emotional energies are drained. And then depersonalization is now after you're kind of fatigued, now you start getting cynical at work. You develop that detached attitude. I don't really care what's going on. I don't really care about this place. And it can be with your environment or the people whom you interact. And then the final part it looked at was personal accomplishment, but it really focuses on the lack of personal accomplishment. If you don't feel like you're accomplishing anything at all, that's what this survey kind of looks to measure. So the next thing I want to look at is self-care. So with self-care, I use the mindful self-care scale. This is by Cook-Catone. It's a free survey or a free scale that anyone can get off of her website. and they can use it as something to kind of assess their own self-care and see maybe where they're lacking or some areas that they could do better on. So the self-care scale the mindful self-care scale broke things down into 6 domains. So mindful relaxation, physical care, self-compassion and purpose, supportive relationships, supportive structure, and mindful awareness. So these domains are important because later we're going to look at some of the questions that I was looking at, and we broke it down by some of these domains, what kind of effect do these domains have. So I also think it's important for our administrators to know some of these definitions. So when we're discussing some of these results later, you can say, oh, okay, that's what this meant. That's what that meant. You'll notice on this screen that supportive structure and mindful awareness are kind of highlighted with asterisks, right? That's because those are kind of the big ones that we're going to get into later that really show that they have a pretty positive effect on the feeling of burnout.
Right before we get into providing these definitions, and maybe this is too early for this question, so forgive me, but I'm just looking at this and thinking, my guess is while your study was obviously to assess school leaders, how healthcare practices affected their leadership and also looking at burnout. But I had to think that as you were reading through this, you were probably also being mindful of your student population as well and starting to see where there was some definite overlap into, as we talk about SEL and a variety of other things that we need to be doing for child well-being moving forward, coming out of the pandemic. There's quite a bit you learned here that will be applicable for that too.
Definitely. I think, I don't think burnout's very different for administrators, teachers, students, district office personnel. I think you all go through those same feelings, that emotional exhaustion, that depersonalization. So I think the findings you can get here, although I did not do anything with students or teachers, I think you could probably pretty easily transpose some of these findings and think to yourself, oh, well, this makes sense. Oh, this is what my students are doing. Oh, this would help them. I think that's definitely things that our administrators could carry on forward to help everybody.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, sorry for the interruption, but appreciate the thought on that, and look forward to what you're sharing here in terms of these definitions for these different elements.
Sure. So mindful relaxation is that first domain in that mindful self-care scale. So this is participating in non-physical activities. So things, you're talking to friends, you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to music, you're just having conversations, whatever you do in order to relax, as long as it's non-physical, kind of falls into this mindful relaxation domain. Physical care is what you think it is. It's participating in physical activities. You could be planning your nutrition, eating healthy, exercising, playing sports, planning these things to make sure you're doing it in order to improve oneself. Self-compassion and purpose is characterized by having some positive self-talk, finding purpose in what you're doing, and those kind of things that help you persevere through some of these personal hardships. Supportive relationships are the feeling of being supported by and feeling good about the people that you have in your life and around you, both personally and professionally, right? Feeling supported at home by your family, feeling supported professionally by your coworkers, the people you work with, knowing that those people have your back and that you have their back is part of that supportive relationships piece. This supportive structure piece is characterized more by work-life balance. And I think I'll get some administrators to laugh here, that our Friday afternoon releases all through the past 2 years with our guidance to get implemented by the next week doesn't exactly support our work-life balance very well. But that's what this part of this is. It's also having the ability to schedule your day, making sure you have autonomy as an administrator to schedule your day appropriately, and also keeping your physical workspace appealing and organized to support yourself at work, making sure you're coming into an area that supports efficient work. Then finally, mindful awareness is maintaining a calm awareness of one's thoughts and feelings and body to guide future actions. I really equate mindful awareness to emotional intelligence. Are you aware of how you're feeling and how those feelings are affecting your decision making? And then are you aware of other people's feelings and how those feelings are also affecting their decision making? So we can jump, that's kind of the intro, those definitions. Now we can kind of jump into the findings and what we were looking at. So the first kind of question we asked was, does the type of self-care matter? So does it matter if you were doing supportive structure or if you were doing mindful relaxation? And what we found is yes, the type of self-care does matter. So the two things that I really want to point out here, the first one is emotional exhaustion. Remember, this is the biggest piece in that feeling of burnout, had a high negative correlation with supportive structure, right? So the better you were with your supportive structure, scheduling your day out, making sure your workspace supports your work, right? The less burnout you felt. It also had a moderate negative correlation with mindful awareness. So if you are aware of those thoughts and feelings and how your thoughts and feelings affect your decision-making and the decision-making of others, that also helps reduce the feeling of emotional exhaustion, which in turn helps reduce the feeling of burnout. So those are two things that really had high impacts on emotional exhaustion and the feeling of burnout. So that's supportive structure and mindful awareness. The second piece is the depersonalization. Had a little less correlation, but still a low negative correlation with self-compassion and purpose, supportive structure, and mindful awareness. So you see that supportive structure and mindful awareness shows up twice, showing you kind of how important those two domains of self-care are, specifically to us administrators when we're trying to reduce that feeling of burnout.
You know what that makes me think about, Casey, is, and those that have been a part of some of the different like IPA plugged in sessions or sessions that I've given as far as administrator academies and things are concerned. I reference Simon Sinek's podcast, a bit of optimism, and it's never lost on me that a guy named Sinek has a podcast, A Bit of Optimism, which I think is hilarious. But he talks with one of his podcasts, and I forget the name of his guest, but they were talking about studies that they've done of wellness of people in countries, and what they found is they can usually determine how people's wellness equates to the way that they answer two questions. And one of those questions is who is on your list, meaning what people do you have in your life that when the chips are down, you can contact them and they will be there to help you, no matter what. If it's, a family emergency, maybe if you need to move a dead body, I mean, who knows? So you have that. But the second question is, they said might even be more of a factor is whose list are you on? Meaning, you are close enough in relationships with people that they know that they can reach out to you if they're in trouble themselves. And so I find that very fascinating that your research would basically affirm, I think, what we're hearing in other places very similarly and how people are doing.
Yep. No, I would agree. And something I didn't include on that previous slide, but it was an affirmation of research that I had found is how that depersonalization and emotional exhaustion, how those are highly positively correlated. So when you're really feeling one, you're feeling the other. And that really was confirmed with a lot of the other research I read. And it was nice to see that pop up in my research as well, just to kind of, like you're saying, confirm some of those things that we're looking at.
It would seem intuitive, right? That's the way it would be, but it is good to know that those intuitions are definitely shown up in the research. Absolutely.
Yep. So the next
thing, you bet.
Yep. So the next thing we looked at were administrator differences. So we were kind of looking at, like, are there differences between the administrators who practice self-care and those who do not? So I got a big table for you here, right? This can be kind of confusing to look at, but what we have across the top are all of our mindfulness domains. So that mindful self-care scale. So mindful relaxation, physical care, self-compassion and purpose, supportive relationships, supportive structure, and mindful awareness. On the left-hand side were a bunch of different demographic variables that I had asked people about and looked at. So we're looking at the age of the administrator, the administrative experience the administrator had, the gender of the administrator, the degree type the administrator had, their job title, the salary they had, the type of school they were at. So, where they had an elementary school, middle school, high school, a combination, the number of students in the school, if their school is designated as low income or not, how much time they spend during the day doing discipline, and then the number of other administrators in the building. So we compared these two things, and we were basically looking, was there a statistically significant difference when we compare these things? So some of the things that I want to highlight in here that I thought were important, you can kind of tell they're bolded, but not really. So the first one is the age of the administrator. So age of the administrator is statistically significant when we're talking about mindful awareness. And we already talked about mindful awareness being pretty important when it came to having moderate negative correlations to emotional exhaustion, and low negative correlation to depersonalization. So the age of the administrator, what we found is administrators ages 31 to 40 had a statistically significantly, higher statistically significant value in their mindful awareness, a score in their mindful awareness, sorry about that, than administrators aged 51 and above. So if you were a younger administrator, you scored higher in mindful awareness than if you were an older administrator. The second thing we're looking at there, you can tell there are no real things in administrative experience. There was one in gender, and gender specifically in that supportive relationship category. I think that's interesting as a society to kind of have conversations about, especially if we're looking at those stereotypical relationship roles and gender roles in relationships, and if that has anything to do with, because males scored higher in this than females did, and we had about a 50-50 split of male and females that responded. So those males felt that they had better supportive relationships than our females. I'd be curious to talk about why that is, especially when we know, how much time it takes to be a public school administrator. The one you and I were talking about before we started recording that, I found one of my biggest findings is this degree. So administrators that were holding a doctorate degree actually scored significantly higher in 4 domains as compared to those administrators that only had a master's degree. So if you had a doctoral degree, you scored higher in mindful relaxation, physical care, self-compassion and purpose, and supportive relationships. This was by far the most domains that we found statistically significant differences in. And I know you and I talked, and it takes a lot, like going through this doctoral program while you're working full time, while you possibly have a family that you're also working with. I think there's a lot of resilience and a lot of efficiency that kind of goes into getting that kind of program done, which then I think bodes better for how you react to some of those stressors that you face in the job.
I feel like you got to use a lot of different strategies, right?
Yeah.
In order to endure and have the resilience that's necessary in order to get through.
Exactly. So I did think that was an interesting finding, for sure. So the next one, you could see that the only place that job title mattered, and really we were comparing, assistant principals and principals, was in supportive relationships. Salary was my second largest domains that were statistically significant. So salary ranges for mindful relaxation and self-compassion and purpose. So what we found in the salary range, if you were an administrator making between $125,000 and $150,000 a year, you scored significantly higher than administrators that made between $75,000 and $125,000. So that was that comparison. Those administrators that made more money scored significantly higher in mindful relaxation and self-compassion and purpose. You can see there's only one thing in the school type. So really there was not much in school type, where you would think there maybe be large differences between high school and elementary school. There really wasn't. The only difference we found in that mindful relaxation is that high school administrators scored significantly higher than middle school administrators in that mindful relaxation. And then you can just see down like, no, really the only thing that's left, like number of students didn't matter how big your school was, didn't matter if your school was low income or not, which was actually a surprise to me. I thought for sure that we'd have something come up with low income or not, but across the board, there were no statistically significant differences in that. Same with the number of admin, and then only one with the percentage of discipline, which I didn't think was enough to really highlight. So I think this table's pretty interesting and telling when you look at, some of the demographics of our administrators and how that really affects the different domains of self-care that they're practicing. So the last thing I looked at is, does frequency matter? All right, we looked at what type of self-care matters. We looked at the demographics, information, and how that matters. So the last thing we looked at is, does frequency matter? And what we found is, yeah, frequency definitely matters. So to sum it up, if you're an administrator that practices self-care more often in any of the 6 domains, it doesn't matter which one, you had lower scores in emotional exhaustion and depersonalization, as well as higher scores in personal accomplishment. So this was across the board. There were no areas that were an exception to this. If you more frequently practiced self-care, and this was measured on like a weekly scale. So if you did it no times, 1 time a week, 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7. So the more often you could practice any type of self-care, the better it was. It lowered your emotional exhaustion, lowered your depersonalization, raised your personal accomplishment. And in doing all of those things, obviously lowers your burnout. So the final thing, I just kind of, in a little recap, I did a little researcher order. These are the things that I thought were important and in what order. So the first one is frequency matters. We just talked about it. The nice thing about that is you can find what domain of self-care works best for you. It's not going to be a one size fits all for everyone. It's not going to be, hey, let's do yoga in this PD session and everyone will feel better. Like, you have to find what works best for you as an individual. And then you have to make sure it's not just a one-off and it's something that you're practicing frequently. It's an intentional thing that you're doing.
Casey, do you mind me asking through all of this, did you find anything out about yourself, or like any type of self-care that you thought might work best for you?
I have noticed big time. So I just had the birth of my first son 10 months ago. He was 10 months yesterday. So I have noticed since having a newborn in the house that I have definitely not been able to work out as much. And that has been a struggle for me personally, because that's the self-care that I really enjoy doing. So I think I've compensated a little bit, and I do more with listening to music and listening to podcasts. But I can tell that, just from my state of mind, not working out as much has definitely taken a toll. And I've had to combat that by trying to do other things.
No, appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. So the second thing was that self-care matters. So this was the first thing we talked about, where supportive structure, mindful awareness, and then self-compassion and purpose, all of those had either a large negative correlation, a moderate negative correlation, or even a low negative correlation on emotional exhaustion or depersonalization, which then lowers the feeling of burnout. The third one is age matters. Right. In this case, it has to do with that mindful awareness piece I talked about earlier. Younger administrators scored better on that mindful awareness piece than older administrators. And what we found with that mindful awareness piece is we had those correlations from my first question, with the moderate negative correlation with emotional exhaustion and a low negative correlation with depersonalization. So I think that mindful awareness piece is key, and that age does matter with the administrators. 4, your education matters. We covered this, and this was kind of our biggest surprise, Jason, for both you and I. But administrators holding that doctorate degree scored significantly higher than administrators holding master's degree in 4 of those self-care domains. Right, which was way more. It was double the next closest, which is this last one, which is salary matters. Mm-hmm. So looking at this last one, I know everyone in listening to this is going to be like, yes, pay me, right? But salary matters. Those administrators making between $125,000 and $150,000 a year scored significantly better in 2 of those self-care domains than administrators making between $75,000 and $125,000 a year.
It's interesting with the education part. It makes you wonder how those results would have turned out if you would have caught people while they were in the middle of their program, versus my guess is you probably, were getting people as they were at the end, right? Or that they had already been through it. So it'd be fascinating to know where they would be in the middle of that process.
Yeah.
As well.
No, it definitely would. So I can just highlight some real quick. I had some different implications for different areas. I'd like for us, our sake, just kind of focus on the administrator piece, that building leader piece. These is really, so for building leaders, I think the first thing and the most important thing is really choosing the right self-care. So like I talked about earlier, I think as a building leader, you have to choose what works for you. Not everybody likes the same type of self-care. Not everybody reacts the same to everything. But what we found is the more often you do it, the better it is for you. So finding that self-care that you enjoy doing and making time for it and going for it. The second one is finding balance. I know this is a struggle for everybody, not just in COVID times, but I think always. I think that administrators, and the research is out there, right, have continually had more and more responsibilities heaped upon them, doing the same job. So trying your best to find that balance, shutting things off when you go home so that you can spend that time with family, making sure that you control your schedule when you're at work and being as efficient as you can. I think those are things that can really help combat some of that burnout. And then finally, lead by example for your staff. We talked about sharing this with students, and I brought up staff earlier and how I think that some of these findings can really translate to those populations, right? So lead by example, that goes up to the finding balance, right? When the school day is over, like try your best not to be sending out emails till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. Make sure you're using that schedule feature on Gmail if you're using those things. Make sure that you're giving teachers their time to also find balance in their lives, to make sure that they can kind of have that supportive structure as well. So those are the three for that. Jason, did you want me to touch on any of those other kind of implications?
Maybe not going through each one of these, but in particular for the district leaders, it might be helpful. But anything of what you have left here on the screen, Casey, that you felt like was particularly important.
Sure. So I think for district leaders, it goes into that supportive structure as well. I mean, making sure you're there for your administrators, but also not micromanaging your building administrators, making sure they have the freedom to schedule what they need and to find balance. I think that lead by example can go at all levels. District administrators can lead by example by not expecting, their building leaders to be doing things at all hours of the day and night. And that can trickle down. I think district leaders, one of the things I'll be interested in going forward is that invest in emotional intelligence. When I talked about that mindful awareness, is that something maybe you can start looking at as a district leader when you're hiring a building principal? How can you assess someone's emotional intelligence when it's telling you that emotional intelligence is important, and you can reduce the risk of burnout when you're hiring someone just by hiring someone that has maybe a higher emotional intelligence than somebody else. And then one of the things that I'll highlight that I think is important, especially at our school, we're going through our Regional Office of Education compliance audit, is maybe looking at policymakers and auditing, taking a look at our school code, right? That school code is large. We got a lot of stuff in there. Are all the things in there the best they are to support students? Or are there maybe things in there that we can take out to try to maybe lessen the burdens on administrators and on teachers while still, maintaining the integrity of our education system?
School code has doubled in size in the last 2 decades, since year 2000. Yeah. So that is a point well made, and one that we share often, actually, in this business, for sure. Well, where can people get in touch with you, Casey, if they'd like to learn more about the research that you've done and the work that you've done here? Because I think it's very interesting, and I think as people are thinking about how they support, not only themselves but also their teachers and possibly their students, I'm sure there's some lessons here that they can take and learn more from you with the work that you've done, which is great.
Yeah, so I think the best way to get in touch with me is here through my work email. So my work email is, so I go by initials, KC. So it's KC period McCarty, MCCARTY at ICTwolves.com. So I'll also type that out for you, Jason, so you can include that when you send everything out. But it's Indian Creek Timberwolves is our mascot here. So we're ICT Wolves.
I'll be sure to get that in the message notes as well for people so that they've got that information. One thing I like to ask people that I've had on for the IPA talk that are in process with dissertation work or maybe have just completed, any suggestions that you would have for people that are in the middle of that process, or in particular just getting started with their dissertation or thinking about the doctoral program and what's necessary, besides even some of the mindfulness practices that you offered here, which I think are pretty smart to help people endure through that effort, because it is challenging. It's meant to be, obviously. But any thoughts that you've got for them that they might find helpful?
Yeah, I think the first one is trying to find a topic for the most part that you're passionate about. I mean, people joke around, and it's true, right? The best dissertation's a done dissertation, but
yeah, you're darn right it is.
But I think you're going to spend so many hours looking at papers, looking at research, looking at numbers. However, if you want to do it qualitative, quantitative, you have to find something that you're at least interested in. It's going to be really hard for someone to slog through that amount of research and put in the quality of work that you need to put into to complete that dissertation if you really have no interest in the subject whatsoever. So I think that's the first one. And then the second thing is what you talked about earlier with that podcast. I think that supportive relationships piece. I had a cohort at Aurora with some of my friends, Katie, Angie, Jess, and Jess. We have a group text together. We've been relying on each other since the beginning through the classes and through the dissertation process. We're there to cheer everybody on as they kind of complete the finish line. And I'm hoping the last two will cross that finish line here in April, I think is what they're looking at, end of April. So I think we have a scheduled trolley ride coming up to celebrate all of the doctors. So that's exciting.
For you, that's outstanding. Well, appreciate you being willing to share that. And so Casey McCarty, thanks for popping on this IPA Talk recording with me, sharing your research on a critical topic, and I feel like to a degree, if we're not careful, self-care could go the way of being like a cliche, right? But because we are talking a lot about it, but what I appreciate what you've done is contextualize it, offering up what the research is saying about it and why it is critical and why it's important that we keep talking about it. Because, we risk losing good people from this profession. We've got enough churn as it is. And there's no doubts the burnouts is definitely part of it. And I will tell you, because I've seen you do this presentation a couple of times now, what I particularly appreciate you pointing out, particularly this time, too, is where we could use some help from some policymakers that we've got to look at ways that we make this job more tenable so that we keep good people in it and look about, is all the things that we're asking educators to do right now even necessary. So there is some opportunities for help for sure. So again, Dr. K.C. McCarty here with me, principal of Indian Creek High School in Shabana. Did I get that right this time?
Yep, Shabana. Yep.
Excellent. Very good. I will practice that multiple times so I get that the next time I meet someone from that great community. But and you've had a big couple of years here, new job, new dad, all of that. So congratulations to you all the way around.
Yep, we're packing it in, but it's been fun. I always enjoy a new challenge. Jason, this was a pleasure for me to get to present in any way that I can give back to our profession. I love it, right? The education has the best people, right? The best Absolutely. People I've ever met in life are in education. So any way we can support those people, we definitely want to keep doing that. And then I think the one thing you said real quick, right? I think self-care is thrown out there a lot. If you're on social media, like practice self-care, but there's not a whole lot of context to it. Hopefully my research can give it a little bit more context to what does it mean to actually practice self-care and how can that self-care actually help decrease burnout rather than just throwing it out there as a blanket. Well, practice self-care and you'll be better. So that's my hope is this gives us some context moving forward to really help everybody in this profession.
Absolutely. Well said. So Dr. K.C. McCarty here with me on this IPA Talk. My name is Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. As always, if there's anything IPA can do for you, don't hesitate to reach out and call, or you can check us out on the web at www.ilprincipals.org. Take care.